Tefo History Channel. My name is Catharina Magrietha Kruger and I will be telling you the story behind his story, or shall we say their story. For I will be telling you the story behind the three interpreters of the Cape of Good Hope roundabout in the 1600s. So sit back, grab yourself a cup of coffee or some wine, for Mr. Jan van Riebeeck is once again in the story. Sit back, relax, and let's start historing around. As previously mentioned, there were three extraordinary people who lived in and around the area of the Cape Peninsula, Table Bay area, as well as all the way up to Saldanha Bay. They were Khokhoi people or Tutu people. That was Harry die Strandloper or Autshumao, Eva or Krotoa, and then thirdly it was Dumao or Duman or Dominee. So we were never taught in schools about the three interpreters that really played such an important role when Jan van Riebeeck arrived here in the Cape on 6 April 1652. Last week we spoke about Harry die Strandloper or the beachcomber. So if you missed that video, please go and have a look. This week we will focus on Eva or Krotoa. She was the niece of Autshumao or Harry die Strandloper. Today I want to tell you about the story behind his story, or shall we say her story, of Krotoa or Eva as we also know her. She was a linguist of note, and by 1660 she was the principal interpreter between the Dutch and the Khokhoi people. She had also an in-depth knowledge of both cultures, that of the Dutch as well as the Khokhoi people. Krotoa also made history when she was the first indigenous person in South Africa who accepted and was also baptized into Christianity. Furthermore, Krotoa and Pieter van Meerhof, the Danish surgeon or explorer, their marriage was the first interracial marriage in South Africa. Now, Krotoa was born into the Gorinhaikona group of people or clan of the Khokhoi people. Gorinhaikona, directly translated into English, would be those who drifted away. Now you would ask me, Catharina Magrietha Kruger, why the ones who drifted away? Because they drifted away from their previous occupation, being cattle herders or hunter-gatherers. They became negotiators, interpreters, entrepreneurs who lived in and around the area of Table Bay, and they supported and supplied the Dutch passing ships with fresh food and water, and they helped and assisted with the bartering with other Khokhoi clans who had cattle and fat-tailed sheep. The Gorinhaikona people lived in the area of the Kamisa River. Kamisa, sweet water, because the water that was coming down the mountain, Horikwacho, or the mountain that stands in the ocean or stands in the sea, Table Mountain today. That is where they lived. Krotoa was born roundabout in 1642. Her name means to be, or the girl who was in wardship of others. That means the girl that was taken care of by others. Her uncle was supposed to take care of her. His name was Harry die Strandloper or Autshumao. Now she was put under his wardship because she never knew who was her father. Her mother married another chief and lived with their clan, and she was then put under his wardship. It was said, or the people think, that she had a very light complexion because maybe her father was a European sailor that sailed around the area of the Kamisa River, stopped there and impregnated her mother. And that's why Krotoa had a fair complexion. The port of the Kamisa River, or the Sweetwater port, nowadays it is Table Bay was not really the barren, primitive area like the colonial history books will tell us. The Gorinhaikona had been trading and been interpreters long before Jan van Riebeeck set foot on land. It was the Chinese, the Portuguese, the Venetians also that sailed around the Cape of Good Hope. So it is not true that the first time that Jan van Riebeeck set foot on land, that was the first time that they actually saw European people. This was the world that Krotoa was born into. And her uncle, Harry die Strandloper or Autshumao, had a prominent role as the interpreter between the English and the Khokhoi people, as well as the Dutch and the Khokhoi people. She probably spoke a few European languages before the age of 12. At the age of 12, Krotoa started working for Jan van Riebeeck and Maria van Riebeeck in their household here in the Cape of Good Hope. Now, there's many stories and beliefs why Krotoa was taken away from her clan, the Gorinhaikonas, to go and work for Jan van Riebeeck. Some say that Krotoa was kidnapped by Jan van Riebeeck to work for him. Others says that maybe she was part of the deal struck between her uncle Autshumao and Jan van Riebeeck. Jan van Riebeeck stated in his diary that the girl was taken in by my wife from the beginning. Now, from the beginning, that was in 1652 when Jan van Riebeeck and his wife arrived here in South Africa. Now, what do we know about the household of Jan van Riebeeck and Maria de Quillery van Riebeeck? Well, when Maria de Quillery or van Riebeeck arrived here with her husband in 1652 in the Cape of Good Hope, she was only 22 years of age. She already had one son, a toddler, and then they also had to take care of two orphaned nieces of Jan van Riebeeck. Now, normally it will not be a problem to look after 3 kids, but Maria was a sickly person. She was nearly every year pregnant, and each year she had a miscarriage. So she needed the help or assistance of somebody that can take care of the 3 kids. And Krotoa was in that mold. She was 12 years old and could already speak Dutch and could assist Maria in taking care of the kids. Maria, it was said that she would give her education in the Dutch culture. I don't think that Maria van Riebeeck really taught Krotoa Dutch. Like previously stated, I think that, remember this out of my point of view, that Krotoa, growing up with her uncle, already spoke a few European languages when she arrived at the fortress of Jan van Riebeeck and Maria de Quillery. Some people also believe that Autshumao, Krotoa's uncle, gave her to Jan van Riebeeck so that Krotoa can gain inside information from the Dutch, so that he would have the upper hand above the Dutch. You can make up your own story, but I think it was beneficial for both Jan van Riebeeck as well as Autshumao. Unfortunately, Krotoa became torn between her own people, the Khokhoi or the Gorinhaikonas, and the Dutch. It is said that Krotoa was like a child in the household of the Van Riebeecks, but I don't think so. You know, she was not given European clothes to wear by Maria. No, she was given a slave dress, an Asian slave dress to wear. Now, if she was treated like a child in the household, she would be given a European dress and not a slave dress. So she was seen as a maid. She stayed for 10 years with the Van Riebeecks, and 6 of the 10 years she was a diplomat and an interpreter between the Dutch and the Khokhoi. Now, nobody knows what she was paid or how she was paid for her services. but we can assume she was paid with brandy, with bread, beads, copper and iron. So that is typically in the stages of the beginning of South Africa of the dopstelsel. The dopstelsel, that was giving alcohol as a payment to your workers, and that led to alcoholism. Her role as interpreter was not always easy, for she was torn between her people and the Dutch. And this also caused a dilemma. This dilemma caused that her own people and the Dutch distrusted Krotoa. On the other hand, Krotoa was also a very clever young girl, and she probably also informed her people, the Gorinhaikonas, of what Jan was planning and gave them some inside information. When Jan van Riebeeck started to distrust Krotoa, he thought by himself, Jan, I think it is time for another interpreter, to employ another interpreter. And then he turned to the man or Dominee Mr. Reverend as the new interpreter. But next week, Friday, I will tell you all about Mr. Reverend or Mr. Dominee. Ironically enough, in 1659, this new interpreter or Duman started an uprising against the Dutch, and it was the first Khokhoi Dutch war. Now, when the war broke out in 1659, Krotoa then fled into the bushes away from the fortress. She first wanted to see what was going on and what's going to happen. Now remember, Harry die Strandloper or Autshumao was sent to Robben Island as the first prisoner of Robben Island by the Dutch. But when this war between the Dutch and the Khokhoi broke out, the Dutch said, oh, please Harry, come back to the mainland, and please can you be the mediator between us and the Khokhoi group of people. Harry was a broken man. He couldn't do anything to mediate peace between them. But as you can imagine, the war between the Khokhoi and the Dutch was not really a big thing, because you can imagine guns and horses against men with bows and arrows. The Khokhoi had no chance to win this war. So by 1660, the war ended, or the first war ended between the Dutch and the Khokhoi. And then Krotoa was brought back to the fortress to help with the sign of the peace treaty between the two groups of people. At the end of the war, Krotoa realized that she had lost her power between the Dutch and the Khokhoi. None of the two groups really accepted Krotoa anymore. So Krotoa thought by herself, the only way that I would really be accepted by the Dutch as a Dutch person would be if I would be baptized. So at the age of 22, Krotoa requested the Dutch to be baptized, and they renamed her Eva or Eve. So at the age of 22, Krotoa or Eva, Eve, was the first indigenous person who became a Christian and who was baptized in the Christian faith. So in the same year, Jan van Riebeeck and Maria de Quillery left for the East Indies, and that was the year of 1662. His successor was Zacharias Wagenaar, and Zacharias Wagenaar didn't like Krotoa at all. He distrusted her, and he didn't see the need to have her or Duman or Autshumao as interpreters. He said, well, you know what? It is now peaceful here in the Cape, and the Dutch have a great halfway station. We do not need the Khokhoi people to party with them anymore. Just after the Van Riebeecks have left the Cape and gone to the East Indies, Krotoa fell pregnant with a Danish soldier slash explorer slash surgeon's child. His name was Pieter Halfgaard. The Dutch actually named him Pieter van Mierenhof. And by 1664, Krotoa then married Pieter van Meerhof, and it was recorded as the first marriage in the Cape, as well as the first interracial marriage in South Africa. At the time when they got married, Krotoa was again pregnant with their second child, hers and Van Meerhof's child. And after their marriage, they were seen as an embarrassment to Zacharias Wagner, the new commander at the Cape, for he didn't like the fact that it was an interracial marriage. And according to him, Krotoa or Eva drank too much. So he told Van Meerhof and Krotoa or Eva and their two children to go to Robben Island. Van Meerhof had to oversee all the doings on the island. Now, what was there to do at the island? Not really much. It was actually seen as sort of a fact just to get rid of them, to send them to Robben Island. When Krotoa gave birth to their third child, they briefly returned to the mainland, but once again after that went back to Robben Island. Krotoa was lonely. She drank a lot, and Van Meerhof, her husband, then said, well, you know what, she drank the whole time, and he hates it when she socialized with some of the Khokhoi people that was on the island. She was dancing with them and, putting on their traditional clothing, their skins, and participating in the dancing rituals. And he didn't like it at all. In my point of view, Krotoa was also beaten by Van Meerhof. At one stage, he told the VOC, the Verenigde Oos-Indische Compagnie, that Krotoa had fell on a staircase and that a surgeon had to come all the way to the island to look after Krotoa or Eva. And when they got to her, she had a blue eye and a cut on her head, and for 3 days she was unconscious. Falling down the stairs? I don't know. So Krotoa's life on the island was very lonely. She turned to alcohol and became an alcoholic. Like previously said, it was actually a slap in Van Meerhof's face when they were sent to Robben Island. There he had really nothing to do. He was a soldier and he was a surgeon and an explorer. So after 3 years staying on the island, Van Meerhof got the opportunity to go on a slave explorer's journey to Madagascar. He jumped for joy when he heard this, and he thought, at last I can get off this island and do something important for the Dutch East Indian Company. Fate is a funny thing. Pieter van Meerhof was actually killed on the slave trip to Madagascar. He never returned to Robben Island. Eva van Meerhof became widow van Meerhof. She and her 3 children then returned to the mainland. For a while, she kept up appearances, but her own tribe, they didn't like her anymore. They saw her as a traitor, and the Dutch looked down on her. So Eva once again turned to alcohol and prostitution. In 1669, Zacharias Wagner, the commander of the Cape Colony, warned her if she do not correct her ways, she would be banished away from the Dutch society. So, she actually was drunk at one of the dinner tables of Wagner. And then, she abandoned the children and fled into the bushes. Unfortunately for Eva or Krotoa, the company's soldiers caught her and brought her back to the fortress or the Cape Castle. And then she was banished to Robben Island for immoral behavior. Her children was taken away from her and put under the care of the church. On Robben Island, Krotoa was a broken woman, and she was probably abused a lot by fellow prisoners as well as soldiers. she had fallen pregnant a few times with different men. And don't tell me that it was out of free will. Probably she was raped. On 29 July 1674, Krotoa passed away at the age of 31. The next day, her remains were taken to the Castle of Good Hope and buried at the church. Later on, her remains were once again reburied at the Grote Kerk in Adderley Street. The Dutch saw her life and her death as just a proof that you cannot bring a Khokhoi person into the very sophisticated European culture. Two of Krotoa's children, Pieternella and Salmon, they were two of the children that she had with Van Meerenhof. In 1677, they were taken to Mauritius by a man named Bartholomeus Warren. There they grew up in Mauritius, and Pieternella later on married a free burgher, remember a free citizen. He worked for the VOC as a vegetable farmer, and his name was Daniel Zyman. They had 4 daughters and 4 sons, and the second daughter's name was Eva. She was named after her grandmother Krotoa Eva. In 1709, Pieternella and her family returned to the Cape. And we can definitely say that the Zyman family in South Africa's ancestor was Krotoa. We don't know, unfortunately, what happened to the son of Krotoa, Salmon, nor the other children that she had born out of wedlock. But we can definitely say that Krotoa is the ancestor of many South African colored people, as well as white people. Prominent statesmen, for instance Paul Kruger, Jan Smuts, as well as F.W. de Klerk. Their ancestor was Krotoa. Still today, the Kamisa or the Sweet River is flowing underneath Cape Town, with all the hidden stories of the Kamisa people, or the Gorinhaikonas, Krotoa's people. We salute you, Krotoa, as one of our greatest ancestors. So, history lovers, this was then the story behind her story of Krotoa, one of our country's best interpreters and diplomats, one of the biggest ancestors of South Africa. Join me next week then for a story or his story on the man or Dominee, the third interpreter. Happy historing around! Oh, please hit subscribe, like and share this video. And see you next week. Ciao!